From A&E, this is Biography. For November 1st, 2001, Biography with guest host Barry Williams.
Robert Reed. He headed television's most wholesome family as the kind-hearted Mike Brady and became a symbol of the ideal husband and father. Hello, I'm Barry Williams. Robert Reed was more than just my TV dad on the Brady Bunch. In many ways, he was like a second father to me and the other kids on the show. But he always had mixed feelings about his career path, and the problems in his real life would not be solved in a 30-minute episode. I think the most important thing to Robert was his work and being respected as an artist, as an actor.
I think he was really far more talented than probably most people imagined.
Bob was so unhappy. He was an unhappy person. He was a real loner. He would just get so angry about things.
He really loved those kids. He was very genuinely the father of those kids.
What are we standing here for? That looks like fun.
Well, I'm game if you are.
Come on.
That was a tremendous pressure on him to be in the closet and to be the father of America, so to speak.
Robert Reed is Mike Brady, is Mike Brady, is Mike Brady, and people never forgot it.
Highland Park, Illinois, a middle-class suburb of Chicago filled with tree-lined streets, had once been a summer retreat for Chicago's wealthy. But in the midst of the Depression, it faced hard times like most small towns across the country. The local banks took holidays, the hotels shut down. Even the hospital came close to closing. It was here on October 19th, 1932, that John Robert Reitz Jr. was born. His parents had been high school sweethearts, married at 18 years old. The Depression was not a time for large families. John Jr. would be an only child. His father made a living working for the government, while his mother stayed home to care for him.
They were very nice. His dad was a very handsome man, had coal black hair and just really, really a nice-looking man. And his mother was a real attractive blonde.
In the late 1940s, just as John Robert Jr., or Bob as they called him, entered high school, the Reitzes moved to Muskogee, Oklahoma. It was in Muskogee that John Sr. decided to try his hand at farming, and much to his wife's surprise, chose to raise turkeys. The farm produced 200,000 turkeys a year. But the Reitzes' only child didn't have much interest in the farm or the turkeys. He did join the 4-H, an agricultural club, and showed calves and other livestock much like many other kids his age growing up in Oklahoma. But he was more interested in acting and music. And luckily, at Central High School, he found he was not alone.
There were a whole group of us that met in sort of drama club, and we all had a lot of interesting aspirations. We were all interested in studying music. We were all interested in, various aspects of theater.
The new boy in town was smart, tall, and good-looking, and before long, very popular.
I'm probably one of the best-looking guys in the class, in a very classic sort of way, very much a catch for one of the girls who would go out with him.
He had curly hair that he was not crazy about at all. And he had pretty blue eyes. Oh, I thought he was the cutest thing, in the world. I mean, he was. And he was such a nice young man. And so he just started calling me up and asked me for a date, and I said yes, so off we went.
Any dating that took place was usually done in a group. Bob and his friends might see a movie or hang out at Chet's, filling up on hamburgers and milkshakes. Most of all, Bob and his friends enjoyed the stage. They studied dance, speech, and singing, and during school breaks, put on plays themselves.
We chose a play, we chose a 3-act play, and it was Night Must Fall by Emlyn Williams. We rented the Masonic Temple, the biggest auditorium in town, and I think we had to pay all of $50 for the rental. So we would go up and down the street in the residential areas selling tickets all day long, and then we'd practice at night.
These children of Muskogee had by now lived through the leanest of the Depression years and yearned for a life beyond their town's borders.
Muskogee was a railroading town, and all major railroads came through, and there was a viaduct that went over the railroads. So we would walk up on the top of the viaduct and stand there, look down the rails, and say, out there is the world.
Bob was the one they knew was going to make it. After all, from the time he arrived in Muskogee, he got the lead in every play.
Everyone, I think, just accepted the fact that he was our star. Even then, he had that special quality.
Bob was also a consummate professional, even as a teen, and demanded the same of his peers.
He didn't like for people not to learn their lines. It was a serious business. I mean, if you weren't going to be there and be serious about it and want to do the best job you could, well, then you didn't have any business being there.
The more serious the play, the better.
When we would read a Shakespearean play, he liked the tragedies better than the comedies. He thought it was more of a challenge, plus I think he thought it was something he could do best.
When he wasn't working on his own acting skills, he would help others with theirs.
Bob was always interested in helping me with the novices. He loved taking that group and directing them, organizing it, and being the producer.
During his junior year, he took a radio and speech class. He did a reading from Julius Caesar, and his delivery was so good that it led to a job at the town's radio station reading the news and doing commercials. He was their youngest announcer ever. For local legend Bob Reitz, the question was, where to go next? Bob's high school drama teacher told him about the theater program at Northwestern University. Actor Charlton Heston had graduated from there. So had Patricia Neal. Actor Warren Beatty would go there too.
It was the best undergraduate theater school in the country. If you wanted to be involved in the theater, that was the place to go.
Bob's parents may have had other dreams for their son.
I sort of had the feeling that they weren't really excited about him studying theater in college. I think they would have preferred had he pursued a career in law or some other profession. But that never deterred Bob.
Bob headed to Northwestern in the fall of 1950 and was even able to get a part in the school play his first year, an unheard-of feat.
No freshmen were supposed to be allowed in the production, but they allowed both of us in. And we had one line between us. So on one night, if he had a friend in the audience, he got the line. And if I had a friend, I got the line.
When school was not in session, Bob was invited to join a group of fellow students performing in summer stock in Eaglesmere, Pennsylvania. It was under the direction of Alvina Krause, a celebrated Northwestern drama coach. Every aspiring actor wanted to be there. For Bob Reitz, it was a dream come true.
You had to build the sets, you had to make the costumes, you had to make the props, and it was a real audience. It wasn't just college kids or your pals, it was people. And the Playhouse at Eaglesmere had a long, long following.
And Krause had a reputation for demanding only the very best from her students.
She was so famous for saying things like, you'd get ready to act, and she'd say, cut, flunk, next. You know, and you hadn't even started yet. So I'm telling you, it was tough. But if you survived, you came with fabulous, fabulous, fabulous training.
Bob got to perform in classics like Charles Dickens' Pickwick Papers and Anton Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard. There was Othello, the title role in Shakespeare's classic, and Petruchio in the Bard's Taming of the Shrew. Bob was especially fond of Shakespeare, believing that if an actor could manage to master that, he could master anything.
Probably the biggest thing he ever did at Eaglesmere was Richard II. And he did extremely well in it, I mean, remarkably so. I know for a couple of years after that, people would ask if they would ever reprise Richard II. By his junior year, I say he was, in quotes, leading man, definitely.
He practiced his skills for the camera, too, making lighthearted films with friends and revealing a rarely seen comical side. But while Bob flourished at school, he was keeping a very personal secret.
I was beseeched by several different young ladies who all had eyes for Bob, and he would ask them out, but he was always a perfect gentleman, almost too perfect a gentleman for what, you know, for their likes. I remember kidding him about it once, and he didn't take it as a joke. He said, "Let's talk." And I said, "Okay." And he said, I'm gonna tell you this because I know you're my friend and because I want a friend, but I'm gay. And is that going to make a difference to you?" And I said, "No, not really. I mean, that's your business." And he said, "Well, can we be friends? I mean, just friends?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "Okay, good." And I think that was probably the only direct time we ever talked about that.
Not talking about it would be Bob's way throughout his life. At Northwestern, Bob continued to date women, and in fact, focused on one woman in particular, fellow acting student and dancer Marilyn Rosenberg.
She was in the theater department, and in most of the classes that I remember for a long time, they just kind of hung out together, and then it got more serious.
The two married in 1954.
I don't know if I was exactly surprised. I saw Bob as caught in a struggle. And I thought that perhaps he had decided that this would be the way for him to go.
Shortly after they were married, and just credits shy of graduation, Bob and his new bride headed to London. Marilyn studied ballet, while Bob immersed himself in acting, gaining a coveted spot at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. It was a long way from Oklahoma, but in London, Bob felt instantly at home. He developed a love for all things British, the manners, the speech, and especially the theater.
He was snobby about that. He always thought British was better, you know, very prejudiced.
But in his acting, he was still all American.
He was a very emotional actor, and when he got certain roles, he acted in a very un-British fashion and did some of his best work on a very emotional level and less technical and all the things that he purported to adore.
This may have been a lasting result of his previous schooling at Northwestern with Krauss. She taught method acting, a more emotional approach to the work than her British counterparts taught. And then, after just 1 year in London, Bob decided it was time to go home.
There was a certain mechanics that he learned which stood him in good stead, but I think that he found that that was the end of it for him, that he wanted to use those techniques along with something more real and more psychologically oriented.
He was ready to take his training and ambition and make a name for himself in the city that had given so many American actors their first big break, New York City.
You're watching Robert Reed on Biography.
In 1955, Robert Reed and his young wife packed up their bags and left London to try their talents in New York City. Reed joined an off-Broadway company called the Shakespeare Rights. Still known as Robert Reitz, he played the leads in Romeo and Juliet and other Shakespeare productions. He was in his element. Critics called him a personable, spirited young actor. One critic went so far as to write, "Reitz is all the bard could have meant when he wrote the part of Romeo." He loved New York and managed to keep busy getting small parts. But the success of television was luring young talent west. So in 1957, Reed decided that it was time to head to Los Angeles. LA was a boomtown in the late 1950s, and Reed quickly set out to make a name for himself, although the name would change. A movie studio convinced Robert Reitz to become Robert Reed, saying the TZ ending wouldn't look good on a marquee. Reed didn't object, although he would later say he hated his new name.
He was not at a place in his career where he felt he could say, I want to do this, I don't want to do that, you know. I think he was really focused on just kind of paying his dues, working his way up, seeing how far his talent and fortune would take him, you know.
He had some luck getting small roles on popular TV shows. It wasn't Shakespeare, but it paid the rent. And Reed had more responsibilities now. He and Marilyn had a daughter, Karen, in 1958. But Reed's marriage would not last. His wife left him about a year later, taking their daughter with her.
I know that her leaving was a big surprise to him. He came home from shooting one day and just walked in and said, Tam, there wasn't anything there. There wasn't any furniture, there was no Marilyn, there was no Karen, nothing.
Try as Reed might to make the marriage work, the end result seemed inevitable. Reed was a homosexual man trying to live as a straight one.
He really wanted to have a family, I'm sure. But I think that there were other forces at work that were going to not let him realize that.
Reed poured himself into his work. In 1959, he was cast as an attorney on the popular series Father Knows Best. It was a brief spot, but a producer saw him and decided to cast him as a young attorney in a new television series called The Defenders. His boss and father in the series would be played by veteran actor E.G. Marshall.
Well, The Defenders was, really kind of groundbreaking in the terms of hour-long drama and dealing with real issues that were confronting our generation, our society, and that hadn't been done so much on television.
It was the first show to examine the way the law is used in criminal trials, as the lawyers wrangled with divisive issues like capital punishment.
I'm not asking you to lie, merely to support our plea for mercy.
You're clutching at straws.
My client is drowning.
Unlike Perry Mason, for instance, where the lawyer always won the case, in The Defenders, it was the American Constitution that was the hero. And so anything, even criminal, deserved a good defense.
E.G. Marshall was the more boisterous, blustery, charismatic guy. Reed played his son, and he was the calm in the storm, and they were a perfect match.
The Defenders was on the air 4 years and received critical acclaim, including 13 Emmy Awards. It put Robert Reed on the map.
He felt he learned a lot on that show. He learned a great deal, and he loved E.G. Marshall, and he loved the writing on that show. That was a happy time for him.
And since the show was shot in New York, it meant a return to a city where he could enjoy dozens of theater productions.
He loved the city, and he was invigorated by it, and would come into the city and just to catch up and see 8 plays in a week. New York was the theater to him, and the theater was his great passion.
And in 1964, while he was working on The Defenders, Reed got the opportunity he had always dreamed of. He was chosen to replace Robert Redford in the Broadway run of Barefoot in the Park, starring opposite Penny Fuller. It meant working a grueling 84-hour week, but it was his Broadway premiere. The play was a far cry from The Defenders. Written by Neil Simon, it was light and comical. Reed played uptight newlywed Paul Bratter, married to Fuller's kooky Corey.
He was wonderful in the part. He was a very, very, very gentle soul, one of the gentlest, sweetest men I've ever known. Very, very private, but a divinely wicked sense of humor in spite of the sensitivity and the gentleness. I mean, a little sort of devil sense of humor.
He also proved to be highly professional and prepared, just as he had been as a teenager back in Oklahoma.
He was the first one at rehearsal. He had the words learned most of the time before he went into rehearsal. He cared about it. I mean, his work was his life, actually. His work was his life.
Audiences and critics loved the play. In fact, producers at Paramount Studios thought it might make a good television series. And they thought Robert Reed, with his proven track record on TV, would be just the right actor to make the transition. So in 1968, 36-year-old Reed, now under contract with Paramount, headed to Hollywood to begin work on another television series. But as soon as he arrived, Paramount lost interest in the series. They asked him to audition for something else instead. Tentatively titled The Bradley Bunch, the show would feature a man with 3 children from a previous marriage, married to a woman with 3 children from a previous marriage.
I read a small item in the LA Times that said that year, 29% of all marriages had a previous spouse with a child or children from that other marriage. It was a social phenomenon that was occurring. And I said, gee, I can take advantage of that.
Reed was offered a part, but unlike his last TV series, The Defenders, this new show would be a very lighthearted comedy. So lighthearted that when Reed read the script, he said he figured it was too silly for any network to be interested.
He was spoiled by Defenders, and he wanted all the material to be extraordinary. And I think after The Defenders, anything that would have come along as a series would have to match up to that, and that would have been a tall order.
Reed agreed to make the pilot anyway and thought that would be the end of it. Of course, he couldn't have been more wrong.
I'm Barry Williams, and you're watching Biography.
In the fall of 1969, a new lighthearted family show called The Brady Bunch hit the television airwaves. Starring as the father of this blended family of 3 boys and 3 girls was Robert Reed.
I told you she was a baby. I'm not a baby.
Cindy, now you promised to be quiet, right?
But Reed's last TV series had been a hard-hitting drama, The Defenders. He had cut his teeth on Shakespeare. The Brady Bunch was not a show he wanted to do.
He thought he was a young leading man. In his opinion, they were trying to put a square peg in a round hole because he didn't belong in that kind of show.
Reed stayed because he had to. He was under contract, and the money was good. While he may have been an unwilling participant from the very beginning, the show would become a huge success.
Maybe we'll win a prize. Yeah, wait till you see what we got for the square dance.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Look here. Think the rain's gonna hurt the rhubarb?
No, but I sure hope it kills the corn.
Hey, it should be a lot of fun Saturday night, huh?
It's funny, it was so disliked by critics. It was so panned by Hollywood, but very accepted by the country, who kind of craved this. I want this. I want that father and mother.
But behind the scenes of the hit, there was trouble. Robert Reed decided that if he was going to do the show, he would try to make the Brady Bunch the kind of show he believed it should be. More realistic, less slapstick.
Robert was always fighting for his idea of believability, of grounding, of reality, of taking the situations and at least making them as realistically portrayed as they could be. The show wasn't really designed that way.
The show had been sold as a light comedy, and that's what the executive producer and creator, Sherwood Schwartz, was committed to making.
He would read a script, and as soon as he came across something which sounded off real, he'd look it up in the Encyclopedia Britannica. And if it was wrong, he wouldn't do the scene.
Reed would send the producers and writers biting memos analyzing scene by scene what he felt were an episode's inconsistencies and shortcomings.
One day, in the kitchen, the housekeeper and Mrs. Brady were each cooking strawberries. Mr. Brady came home.
Alice and I are making strawberry preserves for the charity auction. Yes, Mrs.
And the script calls for him to take a deep breath and say, this smells like strawberry heaven. It's not a big joke, but instead of saying, hi, honey, I'm home, at least it's a friendly entrance to the scene. He doesn't say anything to anybody. He walks off the set, goes to his dressing room. So I get a call, which happened frequently. Bob walked off the set. We don't know what's wrong. You want to come down and talk to him. So I went to the dressing room, and I said, Bob, I understand you're unhappy with something. He said, well, of course I'm unhappy. I'm supposed to take a deep breath and say it smells like strawberry heaven. I said, well, what's wrong with that? He said, you really don't know, do you? I said, no, I don't know what's wrong. He says, look it up. Strawberries, while cooking, have no odor. So I quickly said, well, Bob, could you come to the archway and just peek in and say, it looks like strawberry heaven? Oh, he said, I can do that.
And I do believe I've died and gone to strawberry heaven.
You want to taste?
Sure.
It was the same lack of compromise that he had in approaches he took to other stuff, too. I mean, it was a seeking for The best you could do, absolutely, all the time.
But there was something else that kept Reed at odds with the show and his character, Mike Brady. It was his sexuality.
Bob was so unhappy. He was an unhappy person. Here he was, the perfect father of this wonderful little family, a perfect husband. We all knew that he wasn't.
Although Reed was often seen in the company of women, members of the cast and crew knew he was homosexual. No one talked about it, especially Bob Reed, not even with his closest friends. And by all accounts, he never had a long-term relationship with one particular man.
I think he was afraid to do that, to even allow himself to think about that, because that would have forced him to have been more public about it. He wouldn't have enjoyed keeping someone else's life a secret just as much as he did that to himself.
His desire to keep his sexuality a secret may have heightened the tension on the Brady Bunch set.
That was a tremendous pressure on him to be in the closet and to be the father of America, so to speak.
I think had he not been forced to lead a double life, I think it would have dissipated a lot of his anger and frustration.
Of course, in the 1970s, it was quite common for actors to keep their homosexuality secret.
There was no profile for anyone to be gay, either in show business or anywhere else at the time of the Brady Bunch. And the thought of having openly gay actors was not seen as a possibility in any way.
I don't think we would have been ready to accept this father on this sitcom as being anything pretty much other than who he was projecting himself to be. I think it certainly could have spelled the demise of our sitcom.
Despite the difficulties Reed created on the set, his co-stars and even his executive producer admit he made an important contribution to the show.
His desire for reality, even though I had to fight it, made the show more believable. And I thank him for that.
His work on the show did provide Reed with an unexpected source of personal pleasure. It provided him with a family.
You were blamed for something because somebody didn't have all the facts.
He really loved those kids. That was very real for him, and that must have come through a lot for America, that he was very genuinely the father of those kids.
He made acting come to life. He even, came to me to ask me, how would you walk through here? If you came in now and this is what you were going to do, what would you do? And it's like, really? You want to know what I would do? Oh, no one's asked me that before.
In the summer of 1972, Reed took all 6 Brady kids, along with his own parents and a studio teacher, to New York City and London to show them the cities he so loved. In New York, he introduced the young actors to Broadway. Then they headed aboard the QE2 and visited Reed's favorite London spots.
It was a fantastic, eye-opening, world-traveling adventure for all of us. And fortunately, he had given us cameras, all these little movie cameras, Super 8 movie cameras, just before we went, and it was great.
While he gave so generously to the Brady kids, Reed rarely saw his own daughter, Karen. She appeared on an episode of the Brady Bunch early in the series, along with co-star Florence Henderson's daughter. But after the divorce, his ex-wife moved back to Chicago and remarried. Reed allowed Karen to be adopted by her stepfather.
At first he thought that that would probably be the best thing for her, and that's what he was trying to think about, was her. But I know that it troubled him a lot, and I know that he was very sad, and it was always, sticking someplace in his mind.
I've often felt kind of guilty that there's a big hole in Bob's heart that he wasn't with his daughter, and I think that being a father it was very important to him, and so all of the love that he wanted to give to her, we got.
As successful as the Brady Bunch was, it never reached the top 25 list of television shows during its 5 years on the air. The show was canceled in 1974 after its 5th season due to declining ratings. But its long-running success in syndication has earned it a permanent place in America's television heritage. For Robert Reed, the actor who had studied Shakespeare and who had hoped to be a leading man, the role of Mike Brady was a kind of professional albatross.
Robert Reed is Mike Brady, is Mike Brady, is Mike Brady, and people never forgot it. He became an instant American star icon.
And in the coming years, Robert Reed would struggle desperately to break free from his popular sitcom image.
Did you vote for your favorite Brady yet? You still have time by visiting biography.com. Oh, hey, who are you guys voting for?
Johnny Bravo!
Oh, you got that right.
Being Mike Brady on the hit 1970s television series The Brady Bunch was a mixed blessing for Robert Reed. He adored the kids he had worked with, and the money from the series had allowed him to live well. He was able to buy a large house in Pasadena, California, and even move his parents from Oklahoma to live in their own wing.
I remember the first time he had me visit out there, he said, "Okay, Michael, I only have two things to offer you, either the second floor or the third floor." So I said, the second bedroom or the third bedroom? He said, "No, the second floor or the third floor."
Pasadena was an unusual choice for an actor. Residents there were old money, and the neighborhood suggested a kind of gentility not found in other spots near Los Angeles.
I think that appealed to him, the kind of the squire and the manor sort of thing. He had a living room that you could play ice hockey in. I mean, it was huge, and 20-foot ceilings and carved ceilings and everything.
Reed gravitated towards all things refined.
He loved clothes, he loved elegance. He said his whole life could be wonderful if he could go on ship and have a fancy dinner every night and have to dress up every night. He loved all of that.
I never saw Bob Reed in jeans, ever. But I'm sure even if he had jeans on, they'd be pressed and they'd look neat. They wouldn't look like everybody else's jeans.
But living well did not change the fact that his successful run as Mike Brady on The Brady Bunch could hurt Reed's chances of getting other roles in the future. When the show ended in 1974, Reed quickly set about trying to change his image. In 1976, Reed played rich playboy Teddy Boylan in one of America's first television miniseries, Rich Man, Poor Man.
What's your pleasure, Mr. Boylan?
Wild horses couldn't drag it out of me, Bernard.
And he played a part which is so unlike himself personally. He was a rich roue. That wasn't typical of Robert, you know, to be a bit of a sexual ogre, you know, but he did it wonderfully.
A year later, he played a plantation owner in an episode of the most widely watched television series of the day, Roots.
If any of you break the rules, my rules, I have no choice but to remove the offender for the good of all the rest of us.
He played somebody who was fair, compassionate, and yet, in his role, he believed there were rules, and if the family or the slaves broke the rules, that was it.
Reed was nominated for Emmys for his work in both miniseries, but the role that he said most challenged him was that of a doctor wanting a sex change in a controversial two-part special for the series Medical Center in 1976.
I tried to understand why I couldn't get interested in sex, why as a man, I'm not attracted to you as a woman. It's because I don't think of myself as a man. All those years I've lived a lie to myself. As far back as I can remember, I fantasized myself as a woman.
It was such a divergent role for him. And the irony of it, of course, is that, you know, in his own life, he was struggling with his own sexuality. So for him to take this role was, I think, very important for him, a shock for the public, but earned him an Emmy nomination.
Reed appeared in more than 25 television shows between 1976 and 1980. All were guest appearances or miniseries episodes. Reed did finally snag a long-running role, his first since Mike Brady. In 1979, he took the part of Dr. Adam Rose in a television movie that turned into a series called Nurse, co-starring Michael Learned. Unlike Mike Brady, Reed's Dr. Rose was gruff and delighted in making others feel inadequate.
Look, Dr. Rose, why don't we have the samples drawn again and adjust your next
I can determine the procedure, Mrs. Benjamin. What concerns me is that it should have occurred at all. Now, it so happens that this time no irreparable damage was done, but there could have been serious consequences. I don't have to tell you that.
While Reed wasn't always happy with the writing, there were none of the blowouts that had occurred on the Brady Bunch set. Cast members say he was kind and polite, though reserved.
He was sparing in his friendship. He was never unkind, and he was warm to people, but it took a lot to get him to really get him to lower his guard and let you in.
There were people in his life that he felt comfortable enough to be totally himself, and then he could have his 2 or 3 or 4 scotches and talk his head off and have a wonderful old time letting it out, and then the next day he'd get up in the morning and put his mask on and go to work.
When he wasn't working, he returned to his home in Pasadena. Both his parents had been living there with him until his father died in 1975. His mother, Helen, stayed on, helping to run the house and often serving as hostess.
He was so close to his mother, and he was devoted to her. It was really lovely.
But towards the end of his life, for reasons he never spoke of, the relationship soured. Helen left the house and returned to Oklahoma.
I said, Bob, how's your mom? He said, I haven't talked to her in 6 years. And I said, Bob, you can't do that. She's an old lady now. No. He would just get so angry about things.
When the series Nurse ended in 1982, he continued to act. And as much as Reed spent his post-Brady career trying to get away from his image of the father on the Brady Bunch, he always said yes to the several Brady show reunions that took place in the late 1970s through the early 1990s.
Wait a minute, your mother's right. We have to decide who's going to talk first. How?
Well, we'll do just like we do at home.
They paid so much that he could then still pay the mortgage and go to work on the stage and do other things. And the other thing was he did have this family of kids that he was close to, and he wasn't going to say no and put them all out of work.
In fact, when the group reunited in 1981 for a show about the wedding of the 2 older girls, Robert Reed, busy on Broadway, went so far as to buy himself out of his stage contract to be there.
He voluntarily gave up a week's, that's a lot of money, and at his own expense flew to California to be present at his 2, quote, daughters' wedding.
But when he appeared with his TV family in 1990, the cast noticed a change. He seemed tired and thin. It would be their last Brady family reunion.
You're watching Robert Reed on Biography.
Robert Reed always said yes to a Brady Bunch project, not because he loved the work, but because he loved the kids. In 1990, he appeared with the group in a 6-episode series called The Bradys. In the show, Reed's character, Mike Brady, was running for office. Unlike the 1970s series, this show dealt with adult issues like alcoholism. The serious nature of the work should have been a perfect fit for Robert Reed. But just like those days back on the set of the Brady Bunch, Reed had problems with the writing and direction of the show.
This day, he had held up shooting for so long. We were so behind. And finally, I said, Bob, we've got to do this scene, get over it, or something like that. And he said, I'm not in this business all these years. I'm not going to have my career ruined by this drivel or something like that. And I said, you know what? Maybe you should get a new career, because we all like our jobs. We have a full crew here, and frankly, we're sick of it.
If the series had been continued, Reed's Mike Brady, one of America's favorite fathers, probably would have been written out of it.
He was just such a pain to everybody. I really had enormous sympathy for him, because he had this divided life which he was trying to hold together somehow. But as a producer, I have a job to do.
While Reed's behavior on the set hadn't changed, something about him seemed different.
Bob just didn't look right. There was just that weird look to him, and I was suspicious that maybe he wasn't well.
The truth was, he was very sick. Though he hadn't yet been diagnosed, he was infected with the virus that causes AIDS. Reed continued to work, touring with Betsy Palmer in the play Love Letters, the story of 2 friends' correspondence through the years. The play was perfect for Reed as he began to suffer the effects of his disease. He could sit and read letters and would not have to memorize lines. He was, as always, the consummate professional on stage. But off stage, he could be quite difficult.
There was an anger that was going on, an angry side. He was always very angry on airplanes and impatient, had no sense of patience at all.
Reed did manage to reunite with his daughter Karen after an almost 20-year separation, and he continued to spend time with a select group of friends. And he was able to fit in time for a new passion, teaching. First at UCLA, and later at the Globe Theater in Los Angeles, Reed guided young actors through the complexities of his old favorite, William Shakespeare.
He had a real passion that you don't see in many teachers. I mean, he wasn't doing this for the money. He was doing this because he loved Shakespeare, and he loved sharing his knowledge with young talent. He was a big fan of relaxation and stretching, vocal exercises. He would break apart the sonnets and tell you how the certain beats work and what certain things meant.
But in the spring of 1991, Reed learned that he was HIV positive. And just months after that, he learned he had colon cancer.
He told me he was going to make it and he was going to be fine. And then about 2 weeks before he died, he called me and said he wasn't. He was very brave. He was very courageous. And he asked me if I would call all the kids and tell them. And it was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do.
In May 1992, he checked into Huntington Memorial Hospital in Pasadena. His daughter Karen flew in from Chicago. Other than Karen and his close friend, actress Anne Haney, he would allow no one to see him. Robert Reed died on May 12th at the age of 59. The cause of his death was listed as colon cancer on his death certificate, but listed as a contributing cause was HIV. When the press learned this fact, the world learned that Robert Reed was gay. The tabloids published interviews with bar owners, even self-proclaimed former lovers, who said Reed had spent time in California cruising bars, picking up young men, and paying them to keep quiet.
The impact of Robert Reed's death on a more cultural level was enormous. AIDS could happen to Mr. Brady, and it did. And that was the, I think, the real shock for people.
It was certainly not the way Robert Reed wanted to be remembered.
The most important thing to Robert was his work and being respected as an artist, as an actor.
Shortly after his death, a memorial service was held at Reed's church in Pasadena. His Brady family and his other few close friends shared stories about the man they had long admired. Neither Reed's mother nor his daughter chose to attend.
I think he was a very brave man. He was very courageous. He faced his death with such courage and dignity.
I don't think he got to do what he was capable of. I think he was really far more talented than probably most people imagined.
He had a lot of happy times. He had happy times with some friends. He had happy times when he was working. He had happy times with those kids on the Brady Bunch. Whether he was a happy man, I don't think so. But he had happy times, enough to keep him going and to make a contribution.
Although Robert Reed thought the Brady Bunch was as inconsequential as can be, the cast that love him know that's not true. He affected us in ways I don't think he knew. Susan Olsen said, "Bob remains to this day my shining example of how an adult should be with kids." Christopher Knight said, "In his strength, he was the picture of what I wanted to become as a person." In my opinion, Robert was the perfect choice to give the Bradys the kind of grounding that's made the Brady Bunch one of television's most enduring series. Tomorrow, for Biography, I'm Barry Williams. Thanks for watching. Take care, and keep on grooving.